Okay, this is like week two. Two is kind of a light week just because the way the schedule worked on fell out with the async and the sync and the in person. Um, so I thought I'd. This is kind of a hot topic in healthcare, and I thought it'd be of some interest. It won't be tested on, um, but it's again, I think it's a good topic. So a few years ago, I gave a talk on private equity for physician groups to a national conference. Um, why should you care what I think? It's a little dated. Obviously 30 years of healthcare experience. I've done two stints as interim CFO at uh, private equity backed companies. I did a stint as the interim CEO of a private equity backed company. Um, I was a board member of a private equity portfolio company. I was also a VP at Ficor, um, which was kind of a very hot company in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. It wasn't strictly a private equity group, but it worked exactly like a private equity group in its relationship with physician groups and corporate ownership of said. Um, so it's basically the same business model. Um, so this is the environment's tough, and I think this has gotten no better. Um, the inflation rate, obviously, this is through 2016, um, has gone up as of 2017, what about 4%? And the MPFS is the Medicare physician fee schedule, has gone up, I don't know, what is that, from 2006 to 2017, is less than what, 3%. So, you do the gap here, physicians as of 2017, and it's only gotten worse. Physicians are working, for 20 cents, 20% less than they did in 2006. Um, so inflation marches on. I have other data. To hospital and ambulatory uh, facility fee schedules have largely kept up with inflation, but the physician has not. And that makes for a tough environment because you're constantly trying to budget and decent living. Your landlord wants his or her 2-3% increase every year. Your employees want raises. Your maintenance contracts, your vendors, they all want increases, but the physician fee schedule is more or less flat. And then in 2023, it's actually a 2% cut. And again, most of the physician fee schedules, your Blue Cross, your Aetnas, your Cignas, your Humanas, they're basically tied to the Medicare fee schedule. So when Medicare cuts 2%, it's not just your Medicare book of business. It typically for a lot of contracts that cut flows through to other payers. So what makes private equity groups attractive to, or what makes physician groups attractive to private equity? Larger is better if you're a fan of Michael Porter economic structure, if you never read Michael Porter's Competitive Strategy, I would recommend that. Obviously, the physician marketplace is very fragmented. What Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Illinois has, about 80% of the market. So, your average physician group is pretty small relative to, your average payer. And in some states, Alabama was one of my markets years ago. I think Blue Cross was like 90% of the market. So when you have lots of fragmented businesses, providers in this case, if you can roll up, you reduce the relative size advantage. Someplace like Illinois and Blue Cross, it may be de minimis, but if you can consolidate enough, you can exert a little bit more leverage. So that's why they love kind of roll-ups. Leveraging overhead is a classic thing. You don't need multiple CFOs or administrators, etc. Obviously, to leverage, improvements in process and workflow, and of course, leverage opportunities like ancillary income to have the funding to do that. So that the whole concept of the physicians being a fragmented marketplace. Physician groups, I would say, traditionally have optimal management. My experience, physicians undervalue good non-physician management. When I came to Hensel Orthopedics in 2008, I came in as an interim, and the monthly interim fee was kind of shocking to them relative to what they'd been paying for administrative services or in the past, but they were kind of in desperate straits, didn't have a lot of alternative. And after 1 year, after my year ended and their income had gone up 40% on average, they realized that good management is an investment, not just an expense on the line item. The third thing is in most physician groups, the buy-in and buyout is relative to some kind of a book value. I use the term equity value here. It's not relative to enterprise value. So what's the difference? So if we look at Amazon's equity value, just looking at their balance sheet, their assets and liability at the time I ran this data, September of 2018, if you look at the equity value on their balance sheet, again, assets less liability, it was $28 billion. But if you look at their market value based on their stock price, it was $779 billion, right? So the equity, the enterprise value, which is the $779 billion, that reflects the market's assessment of the true value of the company, which is different from, looking at the balance sheet. So if you're in a physician group, you're a 60, whatever, I'll just say my age. You're a 62-year-old physician, you want to retire in a couple of years, and you're in a decent sized group, and let's say the buyout, very typically it's net book value of the assets, maybe you get your accounts receivable, maybe you're looking at a couple $100,000. But a private equity group comes in there and they say, we want to pay you some kind of enterprise value, and then they offer you a check for $2 million. it's a very compelling proposition for you to take that 2 million as opposed to the 200,000 if you just retire. There's pitfalls to that, which we'll discuss in a second. So this is what makes physician groups so attractive. A lot of movement in anesthesia, a lot of movement in GI, a lot of movement in ortho, a lot of movement. If we include dentists, a lot of dental practices. Again, you look at locally, DuPage Medical Group sold out to private equity a few years ago. So the list is on and on. I've been approached by a number of firms to private equity firms to work at the CFO, COO, or CEO level, and all other things being equal, I don't necessarily believe in the model. So wasn't enthused about the opportunity. So other things, private equity groups love a market with growth. Certainly the baby boomers, need health care. If you follow the baby boomers, kind of the deer through the digestive system of the anaconda, right, or the python. In the 70s, baby boomers needed houses, right? So you saw a big increase in housing. And they got their houses set aside. They wanted to start saving, investing. You can credit Ronald Reagan. I would say that the boom of the market in the 80s has as much to do with the baby boomers, having secured a mortgage and some additional income, started saving money for retirement, and that began the August 1982, stock market rally. You look at vacation homes in the 90s; they really started to jump up in the 90s. So there's this, and if you look at the statistics, I have some other slides in a different presentation. But the baby boomers, is a huge now. It's healthcare, right? I'm 62. I'm at the tail end. Joints are wearing out. I'm going to see, various doctors. My GI guy, my urologist, my ortho. I'm a cardiologist. I'm becoming first name basis with these people. So there's a huge demand for healthcare related to the baby boomers. Growth hides a lot of sins, mistakes, failed experiments. If you're in a high growth market, I think it gives you a little bit more luxury to do some experimentation, etc. Private equity groups also like market disruptions. They view those as opportunities. So we've got value-based care. We have a lecture on that in the future. Shifting away from fee-for-service. When I worked for Ficor, eventually went bankrupt. Some of my colleagues there, they went on to work for a company called HealthSpring that was in Medicare Advantage. We used to call it Medicare HMO, part of this whole value-based thing. They eventually went public, made a lot of money. Private equity bought the company, then took it public, then sold to Cigna. So any kind of market disruption creates opportunity. I love this quote from Rhett Butler. There are two times for making big money, one on the upbuilding of a country and the other in its destruction. Slow money on the upbuilding, fast money on the crack up. And so again, reinforcing this concept that market disruptions equals opportunity. So what are the contraindications? I think the biggest contraindication to private equity ownership of physician groups is this concept of leverage. So, what's leverage? The ultimate leverage, 1987, I'm scuba diving in the Grand Cayman Islands. I meet this gentleman at the bar. He's got a 70-foot sports fisherman boat in the marina. Started chatting with him. He said in the 1950s, he invented the electric soldering gun element. He licensed it, and he's been chasing the marlin ever since. So that's kind of the ultimate leverage, right? He leveraging a patent. A typical leverage, let's look at what Ray Kroc did or Jimmy John did or any number of companies. So Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, or not necessarily the founder, the guy who made it what it is, he developed a standard way of making, burgers and French fries, right? He had a great recipe for French fries, my humble opinion. And he replicated that to thousands of stores. And so he leveraged a way of doing business with other people's labor and fairly cheap labor. So he leveraged that. So Ray wasn't the more he grew and expanded his empire, he didn't really necessarily work significantly harder. He leveraged that way of making a hamburger so it tasted the same, wherever you bought it, and the labor of, basically minimum wage labor. And a way of doing business. Same with Jimmy John when he sold private equity. Same with the guys who founded ATI Physical Therapy and Athletico. Higher price labor, but nonetheless employee labor. Well, a physician's time is very hard to leverage. Okay, you can't leverage a physician's time in the same way you can leverage the front desk or the guy who flips the burgers at McDonald's. There's the education that it takes to become a physician. There's so many hours in a day. I mean, we've done a lot of that. With the hiring of mid-levels. In anesthesia, they license CRNAs. They're even talking about in Illinois anesthesia assistants. So there is some ability to do that, but you can't. When the difference is, the physician is both the primary worker and owner in a medical group practice. That's not the same as, at a Jimmy John's restaurant, right? Jimmy John owns it, but his labor is just a minuscule fraction of the total labor hours, of all the people that work for Jimmy John's. So it's really hard to leverage that physician. And to me, that's the biggest contraindication of private equity in physician groups. So in the absence of that, what happens? So the typical with Ficor, and this is a very typical private equity model. So what we did, and again, we were an Inc. top 5 company. We were a pretty hot commodity. In the absence of being the leverage with more, so let's look at the way Jimmy John. Jimmy John took that private equity money and they used it to expand locations. The founders of ATI and Athletico, they took that private equity money and they expanded the locations. They were able to expand with that capital, and they were able to hire, in the context of Jimmy John, minimum wage labor. In the context of the physical therapists, hired labor, but still, the more centers they were able to open, and they were still able to leverage all that physical therapy labor. And in the absence of being able to do that with the physicians, because the physicians expect to be owners and have a higher seat at the table than your average physical therapist or burger flipper, the model was we took 15% of future income in exchange for the money in the stock that we bought the physician practice. So what went wrong, and what is the fundamental flaw in this model? Well, it's a great deal for the soon-to-be retired physician with 4 years left. So in my prior example, I'm 62 years old. I want to work 4 years left. They're giving me a big check. They're taking 15% of my earnings for the next 4 years. I do the math. It's a pretty easy proposition. Now, if you're a 33-year-old physician, you probably got the same amount of money as a 62-year-old person, but now you want to work for, you're 32, you want to work till 60, 66. Now they're taking 34 years of income from you at 15%. The more acute example that we ran into at FICOR, we were trying to recruit, talented new physicians out of fellowship or training. And, the first question they would ask is, why are you taking 15% off the top? What's that for? Well, that's the return on, equity that we got, that we need to justify the price that we paid for the practice. And the new physician would say, well, I didn't get any of that money. So it made it very hard to recruit. So some real life examples of what happened. In Arkansas, we did a deal, and within a few months of the deal, we literally had a mass retirement of the older physicians. So they took the money and then they retired. They moved to Florida. They moved out of their non-compete zone. And so we were left with, let's say, I don't remember the exact numbers. Let's say a third less doctors than we had a few months ago, and we were trying to recruit physicians and explain to them that 15% of their collections would come off the top, to FICOR. In Arizona, after we did the deal, and part of the deal was structured the practice, and part of it was a payment for the non-competes, the Supreme Court of Arizona decided that physician non-competes were against the public interest and invalidated the non-competes, with a stroke of a pen. They didn't say the value that a physician had been paid for that non-compete should be, amortized and returned to the hospital or firm that paid for that. They just invalidated non-competes as against the public interest. And what happened is Casablanca Clinic and Chandler, all the physicians resigned en masse and basically put a gun to our head. So we literally had to sell the practice back to them for pennies on the dollar. So, not necessarily a fault of the model, but I think an easy trap to fall into. FICOR, we were so focused on this kind of leveraging this, give money, get 15%, give money, get 15%, at a transaction level, that we really didn't focus in at the practice level to really improve operations. And we would have been better off to say to the physicians, we're not going to give you this money. We're going to invest it in your practice. We're going to take less than 15%. We're going to build surgery centers. We're going to develop ancillary lines of business. And we're going to make it so that even though you're giving us, whatever, 10% off the top, we're increasing your business so that you won't even feel it. We're going to increase your income every year, and the money that we take off the top you're not going to miss it. So anyway, the contraindications, I think some focus on corporate wheeling and dealing and spreadsheets rather than just blocking and tackling. Vicor filed for bankruptcy in 2001. After I had moved my family to Nashville, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing I don't have in this deck, I was trying to be polite. So I didn't actually put it in this deck. But, the other downside, the other contraindication for those physicians that are in the audience, how do you like having a 25-year-old MBA with a laptop and a spreadsheet tell you how to run your practice? My neurologist was, in an independent group. She joined. They took a buyout from DuPage Medical Group. They just felt as a 3-person group they couldn't survive, all these, market disruptions that we talked about earlier, and took the private equity deal, and she eventually got tired of having, some 25-year-old in a suit with a laptop browbeater for, who she referred her patients to. They obviously sorry if you're in a multi-specialty group, I apologize, but the economic engine of a multi-specialty group is legalized fee splitting. I'm not saying the clinical model, I'm saying the economic model. Typically in a multi-specialty group, the specialists make a little less than they might if they were in a single specialty group, and the primary cares do a little better. So that, and again, I'm not talking about the clinical advantages, shared compute EMR and all those things. I'm just talking about the strict economic engine of a multi-specialty group is legalized fee splitting. As an independent orthopedic group that I work for currently, we can't boost the income of primary care physicians or we'll go to jail. So there's a strong incentive to keep those referrals within the multi-specialty group. There was actually a 60 Minutes episode on this, I don't know how many years ago. A physician didn't want to refer within the group because he didn't think that the certain providers in that group were in the best interests of his patients. He was fired. He filed a lawsuit, wound up on 60 Minutes. So my neurologist frankly got tired of having 25-year-olds with laptops browbeat her about where she referred and leakage and all these buzzwords. She wound up leaving and moving out of the area. So I didn't hit that in the presentation I gave to the national audience, but I think it is a real and present danger to be solving to a financial model from newly minted MBAs rather than clinical efficacy. So here's a thing I'd like to show. I get a lot of physicians that talk to me about this. And I'm sure this is greater now, but this is a few years old. So the private equity group wants a 20% plus return on investment. I assume with interest rates having increased, that's probably 25 to 30 now, but let's just use 20. So that's pretty steep relative to borrowing from a bank. At the time, let's say 5%. I think it's a little bit more than that, but the numbers are directionally correct. So let's take two deals, private equity versus a bank. Let's say the physician, you're 35 years old, and you're willing to give up $75,000 a year in future earnings. And there's no leverage play. You're just willing to give that up. A private equity group wants a 20% return so they can afford to give you $375,000. And that will give them their 20% return. If you could somehow do this with a bank, the bank only wants a 5% return. That means they can give you a check for $1.5 million. Now, this is a somewhat simplistic thing because of security, but it's largely directionally correct. But we had a fair amount of pressure a number of years ago in the practice I worked for. Their friends and colleagues were selling to private equity, getting checks. Dave, maybe this is the answer. I said, well, if you want, Hinsdale Orthopedics to disappear, let's do this. So what I did is we had an MRI business. And what I did is I recapitalized that MRI business with the bank. And so I went to the bank. I said, here's my assets. Here's my cash flow. Here's my AR. I borrowed a significant amount of money from the bank at, essentially 5% interest against the value of this business. And I gave the physicians all a check to kind of get them off, a decent sized check to get them off my back. And I did that, with an imputed interest rate of 5%. If I had done that with a private equity firm, it would have been a much, much smaller check. So again, this is a simplistic examples, but you can see the private equity guy wants a 20 to 25% return on their investment. That's fine in the case of Jimmy John's and ATI Physical Therapy if you can take that money and you can leverage that to more locations and leverage it with cheaper labor. But if you can't leverage it, it's coming out of the physician's future earnings. There's no way around it. So what are some conditions for successful relationships? Is there opportunity to roll many smaller groups into a larger group that can leverage the size and management to do ancillary things. I'm talking to somebody out west, a few physician groups, orthopedic groups. They want to come together and open a surgery center. So something like that, maybe it makes sense. The private equity group comes in, there's some money, it doesn't go in the physician's pocket that then they spend on, Porsches and vacation homes, but it goes into the practice, consolidation. The funds are used to buy a surgery or build a surgery center. Now you're leveraging, instead of doing that surgery in the hospital where you don't get any ancillary or any facility fee revenue, now you're leveraging that because you're owning a surgery center. Therapy centers, lab, there was a rule change, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago in Illinois. So all the dermatologists, let's say I'm just going to make up these numbers. Let's say Blue Cross paid $20 for a path test you remove a mole, you send it for pathology. Blue Cross paid $20, but you sent it to an outside lab that charged you $5. So you made basically a $15 arbitrage on that path. Some larger dermatology groups might have had their own lab. Well, the payers aren't stupid. Illinois is very much run, in my opinion, by the insurance company and the plaintiff's attorneys. They lobbied the state on an anti-markup rule so you could no longer mark those up. So I know some dermatologists that were looking at 6-figure drops in their income. So there was a big drive, I think it's Illinois Dermatology. There was a big drive to roll up dermatology groups and then and then doing their own labs, right? So a small 2-person dermatology group can't afford to have their own lab for these paths. So they have to send them out. But if you roll up and get some equity capital, and then you roll up a bunch of dermatology groups, you have your own lab, then you can charge Blue Cross that $20. Your cost of doing that service may be only $4 or $5, but it's your internal cost. It's not you writing, it's not you sending it out to an outside lab and paying $5. So there was a big push for dermatology roll-ups, about 5 years ago. Do you need the capital? Are there management systems you can't afford that they'll invest in, data analytics? Do you need to scale up to meet the challenges of value-based care, other things? Some younger physicians, I've seen it in our own practice. They're just not as interested in spending the time on the business sides of the issues. There's a different ethos, no value judgment expressed or implied. The younger physicians are more cognizant of spending time with their families, having more of a work-life balance. They're not necessarily interested in, being on a finance committee or a practice management committee and talking about, funding this or funding that. Maybe they're just happy to have the 25-year-old MBA with his laptop just manage this, and they just want to kind of show up, do their clinical work, and go home and not worry about, a 6:30 a.m. meeting or a 7 p.m. meeting to talk about, the finance committee. So, plenty of groups have done this without private equity. So again, there are certain conditions where it may make sense. But I think, the majority of the groups that have sold to private equity, it's really more so that the older physicians can get enterprise value for the group as opposed to book value. That's just the economics. So again, this was kind of a light assignment this week. No homework. Next we'll just jump into the kind of the meat of the text. It's just, again, the way that I teach this in the regular MHA program, and just the kind of way everything's lined out. This seemed like an opportune time to slip it in. And next week we'll dive into the meat of the academic and cost accounting work.